There were precisely 3 things that stuck out to me while playing through the initial few hours of Mario Luigi Brothership. The first was that it felt as if little time had passed since the last Mario and Luigi. That's obviously not correct, since the last original entry of the series came out nearly 9 years ago. It's also true that I've replayed many of these games in the intervening time, so I hadn't exactly allowed the memory of them to decay in the recesses of my mind. But that didn't feel like the whole explanation. In actuality, what I think I was responding to was the feeling that Brothership is very much of a piece to prior Mario and Luigi games than a revival with its own radical vision for the sub-series. While there were a few old hands on board, it's remarkable how well the spirit of Mario and Luigi has been retained by a new team, narratively, visually, and mechanically. I say spirit, but I don't want to mean that nebulously. Brothership depicts the titular characters in a way that feels consonant with their prior characterization. On some islands, red and green colored blocks spit out coins across a wide distance. Mario and Luigi fight to see who can collect the most. I remember being a little confused at first. We get the sum of the bros' coins at the end anyways, so what does it matter who collects more? The obvious realization didn't dawn on me until the second encounter with one of these blocks. It's Mario and Luigi engaging in a little sibling rivalry. Mario and Luigi has always been the place that most consistently emphasized the status of Mario and Luigi as actual brothers, and it's nice to see the series continue to acknowledge that in more subtle ways. Brothership also continues the series' spirit by acknowledging its own history. Dream Team's Pillow Island did a good job contextualizing its usage of the game's history by making the island a popular tourist site, giving prior characters an excuse to make a cameo. Brothership's implementation is a little more rocky, literally. Things like Bowser calling Starlo Chippy makes perfect sense in universe, while things like the rock sculptures are a little less sensible in context. Why would there be a rock sculpture of Brock Monsieur or the Z-Keeper in Concordia? But all of these instances are by and large inoffensive references that avoid the wretched excesses of pandering. Brothership is not leveraging its past to avoid doing something new. Speaking of new, the most clear and discussed point of departure are the characters now being 3D models instead of 2D sprites. Now, while I'm not so callous as to call 3D models an automatic visual upgrade, I think the sprite work is pretty timeless after all, this was about the best case scenario for such a change-up. Everyone and everything looks great. Characters still move with the cartoonish exaggeration we've come to expect, but the real boon with these new models are the facial expressions. Seeing some of the NPCs' mouths slowly widen when reacting to something shocking, or Shun's deeply disappointed look whenever he gets interrupted, were amongst the funniest bits in the entire game. It would seem little of the series' charm has been lost in translation. These facial expressions work in tandem with the actual cutscene direction as well, taking us right into the characters' faces to see their reactions firsthand. In an Ask the Developer interview with Acquire on the making of Brothership, director Haruyuki Ohashi expressed interest in using the 3D environments to make the game feel more cinematic. This is an understandable desire. Previous games kept the camera fixed on one perspective on account of their sprite work, which meant the cinematography was fairly dispassionate overall. It couldn't really work to energize the action of the scene, which was left primarily up to the sprites on screen. The major exceptions were, not coincidentally, when games like Dream Team or Paper Jam would switch entirely to 3D models during the giant battles or papercraft fights. Brothership takes full advantage of the fact that characters and environments can be viewed from multiple angles. The game loves to give us money shots of its various islands. Bros attacks feel like moves plucked straight out of something from Mario Strikers. Even the bosses are flying and rolling across the map after a devastating hit. The game gets the most mileage out of its camera towards the end, Reclusa being largely presented through a series of Dutch angles. One puzzle even has us aim a literal camera to scope out irregularities within Reclusa's simulation. To Ohashi's point, I definitely can't recall a scene as cinematic as Goltrock C's introduction in any previous Mario & Luigi. I know using different camera angles for cutscenes and puzzles is about as basic a concept as it gets, but I suspect this new addition to the Mario & Luigi series will be undervalued in its significance to the game's presentation. Visuals are not the only thing Brothership has dutifully retained and enhanced. Combat is virtually identical to what's come before, but the boss battles are more of a highlight than ever. The inclusion of Luigi logic into the encounters helps to differentiate bosses further from just their attack patterns, and the logic button isn't always an instant win prompt. You need to remember that the fans which normally heal Pipe Gunk when he shares element type will hurt him if the stage is moved to the opposite element. You can try to control the airship as soon as it appears during the Gloam Bowser fight, but if Bowser isn't knocked to the ground before that happens, then you'll be landing flat on your face. In some sense, finding the correct when and what for Luigi logic is a far more engaging model of what Sticker Star and Color Splash tried to do with the Thing puzzles, because the logic Brothership employs is fully contained within the battle itself, even if it still requires some trial and error. I only wish there had been more bosses in the game. Similarly successful is the mandated badge-like mechanic, battle plugs, which are far more interesting than said badge combinations and arguably more strategic than Paper Jam's cards. Setting the right combinations of plugs to get the maximum effect out of an item or delay healing an additional round was always satisfying, and I appreciated the plugs incentivizing the use of regular jumping and hammering, even if I was still inclined to bros attack most often. I do, however, have two critiques of the plugs. One is that they're a bit too involved for a combat encounter, especially once you start collecting more and more power taps. Because plugs are constantly draining and recharging, some longer battles have near constant interruptions where you spend time menuing through a list of every plug to find a replacement for the one that just ran out. So much so that I sometimes didn't even bother. I'm not sure if limiting the number of replacement plugs you can bring with you into an encounter, or being able to create preset plug loadouts would help, but this system can frequently make already lengthy encounters even longer. Secondly, I wish the game gave us more opportunities to test our understanding of the plugs. There are some side quests that want you to find specific plug combinations to deal with enhanced enemies, but most battles won't require you to think too deeply about which ones you choose. It might just come down to the difficulty of the game, which actually seems to get easier once you reach Storm Star C. The fact that there's no dedicated arena to fight harder versions of the bosses, and the continued absence of a hard mode after finishing the game, means Brothership never really tests you on the combat mechanics as well as I'd like it to. Nevertheless, I don't think these issues are all that fundamental, and I'd be more than okay if something like battle plugs continued to stick around. It's clear to me, looking at it in totality, that Acquire very much understood what a Mario & Luigi game looks like. If anything, it could be argued that they should have adopted a slightly more critical lens. In its efforts to understand what made the Mario & Luigi of old, Brothership also ends up replicating a lot of the series' enduring issues. Even the most adamant Brothership disliker must admit that its problems are not altogether unique to this game. Dream Team was widely criticized for its overbearing tutorials and sluggish pacing. Brothership's tutorials are demonstrably better than Dream Team's, mostly done through quick pop-ups, but its pacing, mechanically speaking, is arguably worse. It takes 3 to 4 hours to get the hammer and to the first boss. Only afterwards do you get your first bros attack, and the game then proceeds to drip feed you subsequent attacks at an absolutely glacial pace. Battle plugs don't even appear until the second C, about 8 hours in. Altogether, this is actually not too dissimilar to Dream Team's mechanical cadence, but the difference is that Dream Team had 2 sets of mechanics, the real and dream worlds, each with their own unique overworld interactions and combat design, to break up the other's routine. Brothership does not have such variety, and so I wouldn't blame anyone for feeling the game drags, especially at the beginning. To be fair, you could argue this is a reoccurring issue in recent Mario RPGs. I doubt you'll be hearing anyone say the Red Streamer from Origami King was their favorite section either. Brothership also steals the crown from Dream Team for longest Mario & Luigi game, but it doesn't do so solely out of obnoxious padding. The game genuinely has the highest quantity of locations to explore, which isn't to say there isn't padding. I'm not sure how much wedding preparations, or reconnecting previously connected islands, or needing 6 different bonds for a watering can really adds in the grand scheme of things, but there is at least a specific context to each of these scenarios according to the story. They are not, to return to my previous Mario & Luigi video, interchangeable roadblocks that could be placed arbitrarily at any point in the game. That lack of specificity is half of what makes roadblocks tedious in the first place, so I never felt these moments were too burdensome. Other backtracking quests are more substantial. I would argue getting the engine from Bowser's Castle is an example of good backtracking, because it gets you to explore a new piece of a previous area, as was the case for much of the Ultibed hunt in Dream Team. Still, it's hard to argue the length couldn't have been pared down overall. The game does effectively have 2 fake-out endings. The second thing that stuck out to me about Brothership was its structure. Ironically, despite Acquire nailing the vibes of a Mario & Luigi, the first 3/4 of the game are organized more like a Paper Mario. Paper Mario games have always structured themselves into larger, overarching MacGuffin hunts. Star spirits, crystal stars, paint stars, and so on. Each chapter in a Paper Mario game usually constitutes its own little episodic mini-narrative, and the chapter concludes with the collectible of the game acquired. Characters and plot lines usually don't carry over between chapters, besides the main one. Indeed, looking at how levels are designed in Paper Mario games, areas do not connect to one another, but are all branches from a central hub. In contrast, Mario & Luigi games are not so clearly defined. Rather than some overarching quest, it is often the immediate demands of the plot or character which motivates our journey to any one particular area. In Bowser's Inside Story, we don't trek back to Bowser's Castle because there's some hidden, story-important MacGuffin. We trek back to Bowser's Castle because Bowser wants his damn castle back. Okay, there is also an important MacGuffin inside Bowser's Castle, but we don't learn that until much later, which is exactly my point. The structure of a Mario & Luigi game is dictated by more fluctuating demands. Collecting pieces of the Bean Star, the Star Cures, or the Ultibed are not the primary goals of those respective games, and none of those quests fit the rigid chapter area structure of Paper Mario. Accordingly, areas in Mario & Luigi games tend to be connected between each other, without a central hub to branch off of. Even the Cobalt Star from Partners in Time, which most resembles this classical MacGuffin hunt, and whose areas certainly do, is still more loose and reactive than a Paper Mario. The reason we go to Yoshi's Island, for example, is because Baby Bowser took fragments of the star that we tried to get in the previous location. I suspect this difference in structure is the main reason why backtracking feels especially bad in a game like The Thousand Year Door, versus any of the Mario & Luigi games. Backtracking is more baked into the design of the world and narrative of the latter, and the more rigid design of the former makes any instance of backtracking especially obvious. See General White. There is a sort of tacit expectation that a Paper Mario chapter is a one-and-done deal, whereas Mario & Luigi areas aren't as obligated to consign themselves to a specific segment of the game, even if they still choose to do so. With that prefaced, we can clearly see how the great lighthouses in Brothership align themselves closer to a crystal star or streamer than a star cure or ultibed. The lighthouses are set up as an overarching goal which defines the larger structure of the story, and each lighthouse presides over a sea with a specific narrative identity. Lush Green Sea hones in on reuniting Wilma's family back together on Rumbla Island. Colorful Sea follows the Idol group's self-actualization. Burning Sea reconciles the towns of Slip and Glide and Scorching. And Gulch Rock focuses on the fallout of Bowser's minions entering Concordia. This is largely similar to how a Paper Mario chapter would be organized. And of course, the reconnected islands all very literally branch off from Shipshape, the game's hub. But that's not the entire story of Brothership's structure. While each sea has a pretty clear focus, the game has a tendency to drift from the main path, thanks to the island hopping. Each island is its own unique setting, with its own problems and happenings, that act as its own isolated mini-episode within the larger sea. In fact, in the same Ask the Developers interview, Akira Otani even recommended playing the game one island at a time before taking a break, treating it like a 30-minute cartoon, a kind of highly episodic yet serialized storytelling. There's a Paper Mario game that's structured exactly like this. It's Color Splash. This is, in truth, why I bring up all of this MacGuffin talk. I love Color Splash's structure. You may remember from my video on it that I thought the world map and its level-based progression was the game's greatest asset. It followed Kensuke Tanabe's desire for a memorable event-type storytelling, which I believe capitalizes on the core strength of Mario as a series. As such, I think Color Splash's execution of Prism Island, especially the violet and orange paint stars, is the best marriage between a Mario course clear platformer and a classical RPG we've ever gotten. Color Splash is, in my estimation, the best-paced Mario RPG. You may also remember from my video that I concluded by advocating for more of this structure in future games. Brothership does its hardest to see my hope become reality. The ocean map is really just another world map segmenting the different levels of Concordia, albeit more interesting and less aesthetically pleasing. It would be too much to say that Brothership instills some grand sense of discovery within the player. The game is fairly linear, and the only optional thing you'll be discovering on the currents are insubstantial islets. But the whole operation is a pleasant enough gesture. My favorite application of the ocean map is in the Gulchrock Sea, where you need to uncover the network of islets in the top left and figure out which one contains the pipe that leads to another islet that contains a pipe to Bowser's castle. It's the only novel use of the currents besides a later fast travel that allows you to search disconnected currents, and I wish we could have seen more. There is one major problem with my analysis thus far. I said Color Splash was the best paced Mario RPG in part due to its level-based structure. Brothership also mimics this level-based structure, but as we've already talked about, Brothership is certainly not winning any awards for its pacing. What's the deal? The deal is that Brothership does not want to treat its islands as a one-and-done escapade. In other words, Brothership still wants to play like a Mario & Luigi game. The problem isn't that the game asks us to backtrack in the first place. After all, Color Splash did have some backtracking in the form of mini paint stars, but outside of a few egregious choices, this is not so far out of line with what a secret exit would entail in a regular Mario stage. No, the problem is that Brothership wants you to return to each island a lot. It could be after you reconnect it, to traverse newly bloomed Connectar flowers. It could be because a side quest asks you to return there. It could be because multiple side quests ask you to return there. Or it could be because the main story requires you to revisit practically every island at some point, sometimes more than once. This isn't really in keeping with the idea of Brothership acting as episodic TV. Sequel episodes are only supposed to be an occasional kind of thing. It may also be a matter of what the islands are actually like in the first place. The appeal of an episodic-like structure is exactly that memorable event storytelling, creating short, provocative moments that stick out in the mind. But the islands in Brothership frequently lack the frenetic versatility and situational hijinks that animated a game like Color Splash. That's not to say Brothership's set pieces are dull, but there's never anything quite as high concept as parallel universes or offbeat as a Shy Guy gym class. Bulbfish Island has the right idea. Here's a nighttime cove where we play detective and uncover the mystery of the stolen bulbfish eggs. Meanwhile, the game also advances the main story by introducing us to the Gloam and the sea subplot with Chilliam and Bernadette. However, the execution is lethargic. Characters love to repeat information you've already heard, and the mystery simply isn't interesting enough to justify the hour-plus runtime of the island. Nor does it culminate in any exciting or unexpected way. You just acquire some basic clues, point the finger at Layden's assistant, and that's pretty much that. Compare it to the investigation you need to conduct in, say, Color Splash's Dark Blue Inn. The game wisely keeps the talking to a minimum, and the inn essentially acts as one big puzzle box, where you have to figure out the secret behind all of the various haunted spots, and how they may or may not connect to one another. Oh, and the manor is also stuck in a time loop. Take too long and the day completely resets. Remember what I said about high concept? Lotta Coins Island is a much better example. Here is the business epicenter of Concordia, and one of its main buildings is currently experiencing a very literal hostile takeover. Scattered across the floors of Duplex Tower are sketch puzzles that require you to investigate the layouts of different floors to come up with the right sequence of numbers for combination locks. At the same time, you get to see Idol finally take action and coordinate as a team in their first real assignment, leading to some fairly amusing scenes. It's also where you learn a new Bros move, and the island itself comes right after learning a new set of Bros attacks to practice, culminating in a boss fight at the top of the tower where you drive the extension core off the island. Visually, mechanically, narratively, Lotta Coins feels anything but lethargic. Most of the time, though, Brothership is content to have its islands be defined neither by novel premise nor narrative progress. Islands like Rainforest, Floral, and All Sand are mostly defined by platforming challenges. While I previously earmarked that as an indicator of a weaker Color Splash stage, I think this is where Brothership has a leg up. Mario & Luigi games have always had more robust traversal mechanics than Paper Mario, so defining stages by those same traversal mechanics is a more appropriate and compelling choice. Hence why I think all of the hot and cold islands in the Burning Sea are enjoyable, despite it being 3 islands in a row playing with the same basic concept. Floral Island is still kinda boring. My reason for yapping about structure this long is not merely to say that I become increasingly more Color Splash pilled with each passing day. I do, but more so the difficulty of nailing down why this game feels the way it does. Brothership is on the right track, but doesn't fully utilize the advantages offered by its chosen structure. It leads to an experience that is sporadically quite excellent, but more often than not simply solid. It's not the only element of Brothership I could say that about. The third thing I found most striking about Brothership was its story. Brothership tells the most explicitly thematic story in Mario RPG history, not because it's the only Mario RPG that has themes, but because it very openly revolves itself around one and tailors its storylines accordingly. It's clear the topic of choice for Brothership is connection, with the outlet and plug aesthetic of Concordia being a metaphorical representation for the social bonds we form with one another, connecting the peoples together in heart and mind as we reconnect the actual land back together as well. The Uni-Tree at the mast of Shipshape responds to strong connections over the course of the adventure, reconnecting broken currents and pointing the way towards more isolated people. The Great Lighthouses function similarly, reconnecting entire seas together. Each sea's distinctive story clearly relates to the development of such bonds. Wilma wants us to find her 2 children stranded on other islands, and Garumbla lashes out in a fit of rage over Wilma's neglect of him. The idle kids have an ambition that outweighs their ability, leading to an unstructured mess of a group. Unlike their name, they don't want to sit idly by as Concordia drifts apart. Over the course of the Colorful Sea, they use Peach and the others on Shipshape as role models to learn some discipline and become more coordinated. The peoples in the Burning Sea must learn to treat each other respectfully, a problem which only worsens when Gloam incursions begin to turn their populations antisocial. Buddy and Bowser Jr. learn to navigate their differing motivations in Baby's first friendship. On the flip side, the main villain of the game actively seeks to sever such connections, Zocket's design being a literal wire cutter. Mario games have been known to adhere stringently to an aesthetic choice, but rarely do they adhere so strongly to a narrative topic. As a point of pure speculation, this could be the result of the way in which the game was developed, with Otani revealing that Mario and Luigi games have always been crafted with a gameplay concept in mind first, and the story developed after, while the gameplay and story were developed in parallel with Brothership. The former model, of course, is a Nintendo staple, echoed by other developers like Eiji Aonuma with the Zelda series. Regardless of the method though, the end results are apparent. One of my favorite things in video games is when the world itself embodies the spirit of its design. In Brothership's case, this means emphasizing the connectivity between each of the islands as they join Shipshape. To that end, Concordia is the most reactive world a Mario RPG has ever produced. The amount of new dialogue given to random NPCs is staggering. There's a new reaction to basically every major event that happens across the story. It's so much I could barely keep up with it. New residents from previous islands will pop up to explore recently connected islands. After witnessing your first gloamed residents on Bulbfish, going back to previous islands will reveal newly gloamed people across all of Concordia. I love their vocalizations, by the way. Brothership is the first Mario & Luigi game to have routine, explicitly documented side quests, which often give little tidbits of background on the characters, or explore the aftermath of the island linkings. Some quests even influence story outcomes in minor ways. Not all of them are winners naturally, but I have to say many of these were more entertaining than I expected. Special shout out to the one quest where we covertly transport a rather provocative statue of Wilma that was commissioned to an artist on Rumbla, and a chain of side quests where 2 brothers argue about whether going on expeditions is too dangerous for one another, only for the both of them to make opposing wishes about themselves to statues on Heat Freeze, and the one where Bernadette's dad farts too much, apparently. Concordia reacts to your choices as well. During several occasions, the game will give you a choice as to how the story will progress next. Should Luigi or Peach get kidnapped on Merry-Go? Should you follow your friend's plans, or Shun's for the wedding ceremony? Should you build a Daphne or Technicky's device for Shipshape? Unsurprisingly, these choices won't be having major effects, but the differences can be surprisingly hefty. The earliest major choice in the game, whether to save Maykit on Twisty or build it on Rainforest first, ends up with your choice taking up shop on Shipshape for the entire adventure. They have their own unique accessories, and by the end of the game, even their own unique quests. It's a surprising amount of effort for an inclusion that didn't even need to be here in the first place. Visually too, Concordia responds to its surroundings. On Rainforest, invisible blocks can be parsed by the pattering of the rain on the block itself. A similar effect can be seen with the snow on Slip and Glide. When Twisty and Heat Freeze become detached, the waters turn a purple shade, because that's the color of the Goldrock Sea. Similarly, all of Concordia is caked in a deep red once Reclusa sprouts his flowers, accompanied by a dialogue change on every single island as well. Even the title screens get in on the action, changing every time you connect a new island, when entering a new sea, and other relevant story events near the end of the game. The Switch era has been home to some pretty bland title screens, but Brothership is not on that list. The one element of Brothership that seems distinctly unresponsive is the music. Recent Mario RPGs, particularly the Origami King and Thousand Year Door remake, came alive thanks to those games' adaptive music, responding to what seemed like every action and every location the player went. I don't think anything quite as ambitious was necessary here, but I also would have appreciated some variations on the main battle theme too. I think these attributes offer us our best explanation as to why Brothership wants to engage in backtracking. In a game interested in connections, it would be quite difficult to see how dynamic the world is if we're only required to see the isolated versions of each island. There's an incentive, at least narratively, to have us revisit these locations at least once down the line. This is why I'm ultimately ambivalent on the pacing, even if I don't think the backtracking meshes well with the applied structure of the game. So we understand that Brothership is quite interested in talking to us about connections, and that these connections are presented to us in a myriad of ways across the game. We have to ask ourselves then, why exactly is Brothership interested in this? What does it want us to take away from this little fascination? Here is where I begin to have some grievances. I do applaud Brothership for its focus, but it's hard not to see how the game's story could have been much more than it currently is. If I found Paper Jam too cynical a game, then Brothership is too nice for its own good, in a way that begins to run counter to its themes. There is an absolute dearth of meaningful conflict between the characters we meet along the way. Take Connie, for example. Connie is so clearly supposed to be the emotional core of the story, someone who understands the importance of personal connections and wants to use that understanding to repair her broken world. It should be an easy mission to get on board with. But the problem is that every single character we meet is also immediately on board with this prospect. In fact, the idea that connections are important is so trivially obvious to the game, the only characters who oppose it are literally brainwashed into thinking otherwise. Why is this a problem? Because it does the thematic topic a disservice. Brothership is, at base, telling a very timely story. Hardly a day seems to go by without hearing some mention of how loneliness is on the rise. It has become so severe to even be coined a loneliness epidemic, with technology cited as one of the key culprits, both directly and indirectly. In-person interactions have rapidly decreased, and it seems that online interactions are not an efficacious replacement. So to emphasize the criticality of embodied connections is a sensible and admirable goal. But Brothership lays out what I think is a rather naive answer for a majority of its runtime. We see it rather concretely spoken aloud by Cosette. There was one thing in all this that brought me joy. Concordia was separated, but even then the islands wanted to be together again. Well, that's the tricky question, isn't it? Do they want to be together again? With addictive social media feeds, an endless supply of news and trends, a world at our fingertips, a digital island to call our own, would we really be so quick to give up all of that for the sake of an embodied connection? Brothership takes for granted the idea that forming rich bonds with others is valuable and worthwhile, in an increasingly insular world where that hardly seems to be the default assumption at all. I'm not so sure the answer is as clear-cut as Cosette claims it is. This is the heart of it. Brothership would be a far more powerful story if it didn't assume such things from the get-go. The Uni-Tree responds to the bonds of the people around it, but what might happen if those bonds were to slowly fade over time? What if the residents of Concordia no longer saw the value in talking to their neighbors? The Uni-Tree would surely respond in kind. It would dwindle, wither away. It would die. Only that's not how the game explains it. To Brothership, the splitting of Concordia is a simple, easily understood matter. Nefarious Zocket and his cronies were the ones to destroy the tree, and its destruction was not a symbolic indictment of some larger negativity within Concordia. And therein lies our fundamental issue. Because Brothership doesn't implicate the denizens of Concordia in the destruction of the Uni-Tree, the game never has a reason to explore the enticing contours of its theme. Connections are obviously good, and there is no reason to think otherwise. But we all know that's not true. Some connections are demonstrably bad, toxic, spiteful, manipulative, abusive. We wouldn't want a new Concordia built off of connections like that. And sometimes it's vital not to be connected, to sit with ourselves and simply be alone. Connie even states this at the very end of the game, that sometimes it's good to be alone. But when? Why? When should we knowingly sever a connection for our own good? These are the questions Brothership should have been concerning itself with over the journey. The frustrating part is that the game practically has these ideas queued up and at the ready. Bulbfish Island hints at something interesting. Some of the locals there immediately point the finger at Chilliam and Bernadette, weary that outsiders might have come to their island to steal their prized bulbfish. This suspicion is not the consequence of the gloam. It hints at a kind of isolationist attitude, actually held, where once friendly allies transform into potential threats. It could be an interesting thread to pull, but the sentiment doesn't carry over once the mystery is solved, especially because the conflict between Slip-and-Glide and Scorching becomes primarily a function of the gloam infection. Jellyfish Island is an extremely bizarre example. One of the most affecting scenes of the game is Technicky's flashback during a side quest. After losing her engineering competition 3 times straight, the reigning champion walks down to acknowledge her. One would expect a sort of conciliatory apology. I may have won, but I still respect your efforts, from a Daphne. But that's not what happens at all. A Daphne is boastful, mean, rude. She pretends to forget Technicky's name. She gloats about her 3 wins. She refers to her competition as an average genius at best in front of the crowd. The scene ends with Technicky wondering aloud, why did I even bother making this garbage? I must emphasize how out of left field this scene is. In a game where everyone is practically tripping over themselves to give out compliments to one another, seeing something so unabashedly nasty is almost refreshing. A Daphne's inventions always remind me that I'll never measure up to her. An average sort of story, really. But I've put that behind me. All in the past, the quest concludes. It's hard to believe her. It's another link in the chain of what is a surprisingly melancholic character for Brothership. Speaking to her earlier at the Heat Freeze wedding, Technicky hypothesizes aloud. If I had someone who understood the things I want to develop and experiments I want to do, someone who'd support me, well, no harm in thinking about it, I suppose. Still, I doubt I'll find anyone like that. It reeks of an inferiority complex. Her inventions didn't measure up, and maybe that's a sign she as a person doesn't either, Technicky wonders. So a few hours later, when the game takes us to Jellyfish Island to beg for a Daphne's aid, the stakes are surprisingly high. The characters have been set up succinctly and effectively. The situation is clear. Even if Technicky really isn't bothered by her successes, we know a Daphne isn't the sort of person to just help out of the kindness of her heart. What will it take to convince her? Here's a conflict filled with possibilities. Yeah, we all know where this is going. Nothing happens on Jellyfish Island. I'm only slightly exaggerating. You talk to some NPCs, play a dance minigame, talk to some more NPCs, make a Daphne a pizza, then reconnect the island. What? Oh, but here we go. She's threatening to throw Technicky off of shipshape to avoid any mistakes in adjusting the island. Now we're getting to the juicy stuff. Nope, no, not even close. All you need to do is choose either Technicky or a Daphne's plan for shipshape, and that's the end of the conflict. There's a side quest later where the two finally work together on some boots, but my goodness, what an absolute waste. This was a rich conflict, which perfectly intersected with the preoccupations of the game. Is this a connection that should even be made? Is a Daphne open to learning about the impacts of her behavior? If not, should we look past that and work with her anyways? Or is this one bond better broken? What if a Daphne was willing to apologize, but Technicky couldn't accept it? Is that an appropriate response, or should she be willing to give a second chance? It doesn't matter. Brothership isn't interested. Making connections is good. Therefore, Technicky and a Daphne should make a connection. No more thought on the subject is required. As it is now, Jellyfish Island is a pleasant texture to the world of Concordia, which is fine, but it's hard not to notice how much has been left on the table. This is the most blatant case, but these missed opportunities are everywhere if you look for them. Cosette is another great example. She's woefully underutilized as a character. We get a few details about how she found Reclusa and why she fell under his control, but none of it suggests anything especially interesting about her character. Perhaps someone like Cosette became controlled by Reclusa because her character was uniquely susceptible to his influence. In a version of the story where Concordia's peoples were implicated in the falling of the Uni-Tree, this would be easy to justify. Being the stewardess for the tree, Cosette would undoubtedly sense its waning influence. Perhaps she saw the writing on the wall. Concordia no longer cared about connections and gave in to that despair. Perhaps Reclusa was drawn to such an apathetic world, and these two events together precipitated the events of Brothership. Cosette now, though, barely even gets a few sentences to herself. Which brings us back to Connie. If the game wants to get to grips with what it means to make a connection with someone, then the clarity a character like a Daphne brings with her abject nastiness is essential. Maybe people aboard Shipshape are utterly unconvinced of Connie's grand plan at first. Maybe they just don't think reconnecting the islands is all that important, or that Connie, being a newbie Wattanist, doesn't have what it takes. People on Shipshape could start taking bets about whether Connie will even be capable of bringing the Great Lighthouse to life. It's mean, I know, but wouldn't it make you all the more invested in seeing Connie succeed? Showing the people of Concordia that not only can we do it, but make them believe in the mission too? I know I'm basically rewriting Brothership at this point, but I hope it's clear what I'm getting at. When the game makes it so that Concordia's isolation is something that happens to its populace, rather than something they themselves help to perpetuate, Brothership misses something important. Solitude is an active process, not a passive one. Solitude is, ironically, anything but lonely. It requires a system of people to actualize. In some sense, solitude isn't about how you treat yourself, it's about how you treat others. But come on, it's a Mario game. Surely it's unfair to expect such a nuanced exploration of the topic here of all places. Except Brothership does understand these nuances of solitude, and it shows us them too. The last 5 hours of Brothership are great because it's the game finally extending the metaphor rather than just repeating it. For most of the adventure, we see Zocket nursing a strange egg back to full strength. I had assumed that Reclusa would turn out to be some ambient force of nature, a sort of metaphysical representation of loneliness, the kind of villain a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game might have in its final few hours. That assumption was very wrong. Reclusa is a character in his own right, with his own personality and motivations. This choice confers many positive qualities to the story of Brothership, not the least of which being that it clarifies the themes of the game. Reclusa's first order of business is severing the connections between the peoples of Concordia we've spent so long repairing. The methodology is simple. Large inverse pitcher plants begin to sprout up across all the islands, ensnaring the nearest person and uploading them into one of Reclusa's simulations. In the simulations, Reclusa can create individualized paradises, carefully curated worlds to confirm the wildest ambitions and inane biases of the person. Brothership is starting to key into the very ideas I've been talking about this whole time. I don't think it is a coincidence that Reclusa is a jester with a monitor for a head. The design is playing off of the same anxieties about technology I referred to earlier, that it is the source of our loneliness epidemic, and that, like Reclusa's empty simulations, the internet is a vortex for little more than hollow, solipsistic interactions. That solipsism is the interesting thing. From the mumblings of those trapped inside the plants, we see how the people respond to their newfound isolation. Loneliness seems to be the last thing on their minds. Dr. Volko imagines his research becoming highly successful. Techniki imagines herself being lavished with praise after inventing brilliant new contraptions. These are not people despairing in their solitude, sulking quietly to themselves. Reclusa's solitude is starkly jubilant and egotistical. This is no conflation of concepts. Brothership is suggesting a relation between the vain imaginings of the people trapped in the simulations and the solitude Reclusa wants to blanket the world with. Several times, it is stated that Mario and Luigi have a strong bond, enough to break free from the Gloam themselves without the need for an Ampberry. But why is this the case? How are Mario and Luigi able to break free from the simulation, but not the peoples of Concordia? Why are the connections between the Concordians weaker than that of the Bros? I don't think the game wants us to believe it is the result of main character syndrome or magic. I think Brothership is trying to tell us something about the people we've been trying to save. The Concordians are trapped inside the simulations because they never really understood what was so good about bonds in the first place. To them, bonds are an instrumental tool to achieve one's desires, but they are not worth seeking out for their own sake. And once given a world where they can have everything they want, they are perfectly content to stay in place. The people of Concordia cannot escape Reclusa because on some level they want to stay with him. We see how the procedure plays out when Mario and Luigi become trapped inside a simulation of their own. The false version of the Mushroom Kingdom is idyllic. Clear skies, happy celebrations, and peace as far as the eye can see. The bros quickly find the limits of the simulation when they try to enter Peach's castle. Much to Reclusa's frustration, Mario and Luigi don't want to stick to playing around the courtyard, so he tries to make the simulation more appealing. This time, Peach has set up a bunch of platforming challenges around the courtyard. That's what the bros like to do, right? So surely they'll stay in the courtyard this time. Mario and Luigi enter Peach's castle, so Reclusa tries again. This time, Bowser's minions and Bowser himself have joined the festivities, promising a truce with Peach so there'll be no more kidnappings again. Maybe the bros just couldn't relax knowing their arch-nemesis was still on the loose. So surely they'll stay in the courtyard this time. Mario and Luigi enter Peach's castle, so Reclusa tries again. This time, Bowser's minions make sure to clarify that peace is still on the table, but that Bowser won't be joining the festivities. Maybe bringing in the arch-nemesis wasn't such a good idea in hindsight. Hard to relax when the guy you hate is sitting right next to you, yeah? So surely they'll stay in the courtyard this time. Of course they don't. The exercise reveals more about Reclusa than it does the bros. The best kind of world can be created simply by manipulating a few salient variables to your liking. Consider the language Reclusa deploys to describe Concordia and its subjects. He refers to them as toys, good for playing with. He becomes angry when the bros reject his simulation, claiming they're too boring, and that toys who aren't any fun need to be broken. Reclusa's solitude isn't about being alone, it's about acting as if you're the only one in the room. The figures in the simulation don't have wills or desires of their own. They're playthings with which to enact the simulator's will. Techniki's solitude is a world in which she is the only person of relevance. Everyone else ought only to be there to praise her. And when his toys don't want to play along, when they exert a will of their own in contradiction to Reclusa, his precious solitude is broken. He must contend with the fact that he is not alone. This is why Connie links solitude with selfishness, and what Brothership ultimately wants to argue to us about the nature of solitude. That when we close ourselves off to the world, we don't only do harm to us as individuals, we harm everyone around us, turn them into objects on our playground, minstrels for our own selfish songs. To form a connection with someone means to understand them, to act as if their value and autonomy is equal to yours. Someone who wishes to form a connection with someone could never want a simulation like Reclusa's, where they alone get to be in control. That's what Reclusa could never understand. The appeal of a bond is that they're a two-way street. I wouldn't go as far as to say Brothership saves its story at the last moment. It was never bad. Occasionally it was pretty neat. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think it could be more incisive. After beating Reclusa, Connie states that the journey aboard Shipshape has caused Concordia to remember the importance of bonds. But when did they ever forget? That only really happened right at the end. Most of the people we met along the way seemed quite attuned to the importance of bonds. And as we've already seen, Connie's sentiment is outright contradicted by her mentor. I know for a fact that a Mario game can tell a story with the rigor this topic deserves, because Brothership does it in the last 5 hours. But a better story would have sprinkled these nuances throughout the entire length of the adventure, using the characters on each island as opportunities to explore different facets of the topic. Consequently, Brothership makes a far less convincing case for its main thematic point than it should, because it very nearly forgets to make the case at all. It's a game which has all the right pieces laid out, but ironically enough, doesn't feel the compulsion to connect them. Some recalibration may be in order. While I don't think it was a slam dunk, I appreciate Brothership for trying to do something ambitious. I doubt I could be so detailed in my critiques about Bowser's Inside Story or Dream Team's story. Then again, I haven't tried. Yet. New directions are nice. However, it's also nice to have a Mario RPG that feels unencumbered after nearly a decade of not getting one. And in that regard, I have to say Brothership was quite a success for me. That's not me grading on a curve either. Brothership is a game which feels both right at home in the Mario and Luigi pantheon, and a game which isn't content to simply repeat past successes. 3 things may have stuck out to me while playing Brothership, but after closing the credits, I suspect that's the thing that will stick out the longest. Maybe this game is a 5 out of 10.